The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Brian and Miss Berlin for Breaking Down Security.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad. This is a little different for us this week. We are doing a sponsored podcast, so just to be transparent and upfront, what we're talking about today was actually bought and paid for, and what we're doing with those with that money is trying to find ways to improve the podcast experience for everybody. And we're
Wait! I thought we were going to buy our own helicopter.
Well, it's a drone fleet is the new hotness now for all the rich podcasters. Drone fleets are.
But can drone fleets like carry people too?
Yes. Have you not? Right. Ferries, have you seen, yeah, you can have like 10 or 15 of them and, they'll fly you around.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah, it's not like Jetpack Guy in LA or whatever. But the idea is we're going to use, sponsorships to fund things like full transcripts, text transcripts for the show, and perhaps use some of the remainder for things like scholarships or training for people who may not be able to afford things like OSCP or SANS courses. So those are some initiatives we're trying to roll out in the coming future. So this week is kind of a continuation of an earlier podcast we did with Illumio. So there'll be a link in the show notes for the podcast to that one. And when we talked to James at Illumio, we found the idea of microsegmentation and zero trust interesting. And, their PR folks were very kind to mention that we have other people at the organization. And I said yes. And one of the requirements was also to have people who are knowledgeable, so that way we're not just talking to salespeople. No offense to the salespeople out there, but other things like diversity and that. So I said yes, I'd love to have people on the show, but I want to highlight diversity on the podcast as well. So Illumio was more than happy to oblige us there. So we have Neil Patel on. Welcome, Neil, to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm excited. This is gonna be a good one. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Right on. So Neil, tell us a little bit about what you do at Illumio and, what exactly Illumio is for those who've not listened to the earlier podcast.
For sure. So at Illumio, I'm a technical marketing engineer, and I know the title kind of in itself sounds like an oxymoron, technical marketing engineer, all kind of mashed together. But what I do at Illumio, it's really around evangelization of segmentation, zero trust, and Illumio as a company. But also I work a lot with product and engineering to kind of take input from the world, right? From the field, from what the security industry is saying, and develop and make the products better, but also take what engineering and what they have built and bring it to the world as a consumable item, right? It may be some very technical concept, or it may be a very intense, feature that's been put out, but being able to present it and represent it to the field and to the customers and to the world, but what it is and the value it brings. Illumio as a company is it's really focused in on segmentation, right? The concept here being you have diverse environments, be it public cloud, containers, infrastructure with servers, bare metal, all that kinds of good stuff. And being able to secure that effectively, uniformly is actually quite challenging if we think about it, right? Different infrastructure and different architecture require different approaches. So what Illumio has really prided itself on is a way to standardize segmentation so that you can kind of have a very key piece to the zero trust story in place when it comes to designing your data centers or designing your public cloud or your container environments, whatever it may be.
Fantastic. Okay. So for definitions purposes, we've talked about a few things: microsegmentation, zero trust. In Illumio's definition, what is zero trust, and why should companies adopt a zero trust philosophy?
Sure. So I think you kind of half answered that in that statement, and we see zero trust as really a philosophy. It's not, it's not a product or a solution that's going to solve solve a problem. It's a mindset when designing pretty much everything, be it, HR workflow to products and code. We look at zero trust as thinking about everything you do in the context of least privilege, only allowing or permitting exactly what is necessary for operation. And we look at it from the microsegmentation lens, right? We take it as you have a lot of interconnected systems, be it in public cloud, be it in on-premise, be it containerized. That environment should be designed with a zero trust mindset. So when these systems are integrated to provide a service, whether it's your business's service or it's an internal service for your employees, the way it is architected and connected together should be zero trust. And we do that through segmentation. So the idea here being all of these pieces are kind of bubbled into little circles or segments. So they're communicating in a very specific way that is prescribed by the goal of the application or the goal of the service. And then anything beyond that is considered out of scope, not part of the function. And so it's inherently denied or not permitted.
Okay.
What's like the minimum barrier to entry when thinking about even going down the path of implementing something like this?
Yeah, so I think the minimum barrier to entry from a Illumio perspective is just the mindset. I want to do zero trust. The minimum barrier to entry to do segmentation is really, it's a buy-in from multiple stakeholders, right? When you're trying to do segmentation, it's not just, a security architect sitting at the table saying, I need to start implementing some sort of zero trust methodology into my infrastructure, but also buy-in from the people that designed the infrastructure, the people that designed the applications and the software. All of these parties kind of have to come together to sit down and say, we have to take this approach, and then it can be kind of effective, right? If you have one arm just trying to finagle their way in and do it, it's not really going to be a successful story. It might be half implementer, it might be kind of semi there, but then you have a lot of pieces left open and dangling, which doesn't really get you to that ideal world of zero trust.
Okay. So there's so I have a traditional network, VPN, AWS instances, or maybe, I'm real old school, or I have my own physical data center. CIOs listening to this or CISOs listening to this podcast, and they say, oh, that sounds great. But we have a traditional network environment. How does one implement that in a traditional network environment, and how many changes? And obviously this is not an overnight kind of thing. This would be a long-term solution, but how do you create microsegmentation in an organization that has already a fully fleshed out environment? Can you create bubbles around those things and then, break those down as you go along, or does it require a complete re-architecture of the environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if you think about it, it's a lot of work. If you think about how you would start, logically breaking apart that network or that infrastructure to create your segments, you're going to start thinking about things like, all right, well, I already got, VLAN set up. I've already got kind of, maybe border firewalls around each one of my racks or my segments, or maybe I've got an edge firewall at the corner of my AWS environment. I've got some kind of infrastructure there. There's a lot to think about here, and it becomes very challenging very quick. You can just thinking about a very even simple environment like you explained, physical data center, AWS, a little bit here, a little bit there, trying to get consistency across all of that would be very challenging. And so the approach that has kind of come to light as the way to standardize this is using the host as the core of the segmentation. So when you have infrastructure or workloads in a physical data center and in an AWS or an Azure or a GCP, the only commonality between all of those is really the fact that there are hosts. One may be physically here, one may be, logically here via the cloud, but they're both hosts. So if we spread the border of segmentation to the host itself, and we look at the host as its individual entity, we can implement segmentation without necessarily concerning ourselves with the connective tissue. So I don't have to rely on the way these two elements are connected to enforce my security. I can do it at a host level. And as a result, however they're connected, is irrelevant, just the fact that they are connected.
Okay.
That's the approach that we've seen being the most prevalent and the most effective to kind of bridge that gap.
Okay. So how does Illumio fit into this? I mean, I've got a bunch of Cisco kit, or I've got a bunch of Palo Alto kit, or what have you. Is Illumio another Blinky box, or are you consulting services, or are you software as a service? Are you software-defined networking? If I wanted to engage Illumio, what kind of hardware or software or process am I looking at trying to implement at this point?
Yeah. Illumio is pure software. So we're not going to ask you to buy a new Blinky box. There's not going to be any plugging. There's not going to be any inline wiring. We deploy as software on the host. And like I explained before, we kind of leverage the host to do the segmentation for us. We put the enforcement point at the host. And as a result, when you write your policy and when you form your security posture to segment things, your host is kind of your, your critical piece. That's your key. And when you put your security and define your policy around it, it is permitted to do what it needs to based on the policy it gets at its very edge. And then once the traffic goes beyond that, that's reliant upon your infrastructure, your connective tissue, all of your underlying network to do its work. But we take the load off of managing, multiple routers or firewalls in a path to make sure the policy is consistent. That requires a lot of automation. There's a lot of, work that has to be done to make sure that when A is talking to B, all of the connective tissue is in line to make sure that connection is secure in the way that we want it to. What we can do with Illumio and host-based solution really is you can just look at it from the two endpoints and then see how they're communicating with each other and build the policy at the host, the endpoint, the workload, that edge piece, and then not worry about what's going on in between.
One of the things that I've heard people mention is one of the harder aspects of zero trust or any kind of thing like this is you have to have like 100% guaranteed asset management before you even think about doing it. Is that something that you guys also kind of help do, or is that something you have to have done beforehand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely having an understanding, of your inventory is extremely important. We help in a way that is kind of to visualize the connective tissue. So you can bring on board your entire real estate, all of your machines, whether they're, again, AWS, physical, standard, whatever it may be, and start visualizing them very quickly. We can read in data sets from, things like maybe an asset management tool or a CMDB or an Excel spreadsheet that somebody put together that controls, this is everything that I know of at least. And what you can do is you can take that, map it into Illumio, and then what you'll have is the remainder. And that would be where you can start, dragging them into the bubbles and the ports or the groups that they fit into. So we can really help clean and create hygiene around what's already there. So if there is a world where there's a partial list, that's great. We can kind of create a map with the partial list and then look at the remainder and group it in where it needs to go, all, visually from a map view. If it's completely fresh and completely clean, you can start with, big blocks. Like this is all in this location. This is all in this location. And then start the grouping like that. And then you can go to smaller blocks. Well, I know these pieces are serving my CRM, or these pieces are serving, point of sale. And then you can start breaking it out like that. So it all starts with a visualization and an understanding, and then you can start breaking it off as you need to.
Okay. So what are some of the challenges and benefits that come with microsegmentation? I'm thinking along the lines of everybody's working remote now. What kind of changes have to go in? It used to be you got a VPN client and you go into the environment, and from everything I've read about zero trust, and maybe it's different for Illumio, but it's more like the server doesn't trust the user, and then there's some keys that come back to the client. I mean, what does that look like if somebody was adopting that from an endpoint perspective?
Yeah, from an endpoint perspective, you would be thinking about things like authorized access or zero trust or least privilege from an access perspective. That's getting you into the data center. Illumio is kind of focusing once you're in the data center. So what we would say is, again, getting back to the point of zero trust being a philosophy and a mindset, if someone's coming up to you and saying, my zero trust is going to get you zero trust, it's not necessarily true, because there's a lot of parts to it. And you bring a very good point. The idea that there's this huge unknown now with everybody being remote of getting access into the resources, the critical assets. So before, that may have just been a VPN connection. And then we can authorize that based on, the IP network range that you get when you get connected to the VPN. You get a specific IP from a specific range, and then we can control it based on that. When you start moving to a world where you're authenticating maybe based on the user, or you're authenticating based on, the laptop or the machine, we can help you do a little bit of that with kind of authenticating the user and giving them access based on, maybe what domain group they're a part of. But there is a piece before that that's very important that has to be approached, which is really identity and access management. Making sure that the person that is on that endpoint is who they say they are, and making sure that endpoint has the right posture, has the right software, has the right security, status before it gets connected into the network. So there's that whole piece that still has to be approached, and it's something that can't be left to the side, because like I said, you do one part of it without the other part, and you're kind of halfway there, or you're 1/3 the way there.
Okay. So it's one of the questions are real world examples of how segmentation has stopped a breach, and how that relates to the philosophy of zero trust.
Yeah. So the real world, I won't give too many specific examples, as when you work with customers or you work with real vendors, or you don't really want to be like, oh yeah, this person had this massive breach. But the idea really is, generally when you think about when breaches spread or when they make the front page, it never started by somebody, breaking into the, credit card information right off the bat. They didn't go right into the database and start pulling that information out. It actually started from a more benign location. Maybe it was a weak security posture on an IoT device, or maybe it was, an endpoint that was, roaming around without security or without an update for a while that got, infected and then came onto the network. So when you think about a breach that steals critical data, or a breach that brings down an organization, or that's large scale, it started somewhere relatively small, and it was able to make its way into critical systems. It was able to jump from A to B to C to D until it got to where it needed to. And that is where segmentation is so important, because what'll happen is, we know, in security, all of us, that breach is an eventuality. So that infection of A will happen, but we control how far A can go. Can it go to the next hop? Is it able to get into the next part of the chain, or the data center, or the next part of the application? That's what we can control. And that's where segmentation is so critical, to prevent that breach from spreading. Because if you have the right controls and you're segmenting it in a way where you're only permitting the critical communications, something from the outside that's trying to do reconnaissance, or that's trying to exploit, a vulnerability or something that may be existent on a host, it's inert. It no longer can do it because the pathway is not there. So that's where segmentation becomes critical in preventing that spread or that proliferation.
Okay. So we've
go
go ahead.
So one of my big things is I love knowing what kind of logs come out of different platforms, and pretty much everything, because I love looking at logs all day. What do you have, like any kind of API that you can pull out of, or anything like that kind of tells you, oh, this is like a host that's always having problems, or and anything like that, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. And I'm with you on that. I believe that every platform that's in security, any way, shape, or form, should have some sort of information it can pull out. And Illumio, actually, the way we've built the product is API first. So if you wanted to drive the car without the UI, you're more than welcome to. So every piece of information that we put in to build this color-rich map of how applications communicate, and the number of flows between workloads or applications, all of that can be pulled out in whatever form you want. You can take it as JSON, you can take it as syslog, you can pull it out and ingest it wherever you need to, and you can absolutely write that kind of correlation, which would build hey, this is the baseline. Every day, for the past 3 months, there's been 7, connections outbound here. And that's my standard baseline. And then tomorrow, if there's 500, there's something going on here. And we have out of box integrations with, your standard SIM vendors, and then you can plug it into there and then build your correlation profiles if you want to, however you want it to do it. But the short answer to that, absolutely. That log information can be pulled out any way you want. The pieces of information that we collect, we'll collect details about the host or the workload itself, what OS it's running, its IP addresses, if it has multiple interfaces, v4, v6. We'll take all of the log data from a connection standpoint out. So any traffic that originated from that host outward, or any traffic that originated from somewhere else into that host. And we'll also give you a little bit more context around the port, the process, and the protocol that initiated that and where it terminated, and the policy decision. So if you had a policy in place for that application and that workload, we would give you the information about this traffic conforms to the policy, this traffic does not, as a result, it was blocked. So that kind of context around what is going on between the applications and workloads is all exportable, and you can look at it in whatever form you want.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. So you've mentioned integrations. You were talking about authentication and authorization functions. I just saw on your website that you do integrate with EDRs. What does that integration look like, and what kind of feedback are you giving those integrations, and how is that working? Is it API based, or how does like you mentioned Crowdstrike Falcon on your website? What does integration with your EDRs and your NDRs and all that look like for Zero Trust?
So I'll talk to it about 2 prongs, right? So the core product with the segmentation in the data center, the integration into let's say an NDR or an EDR would really be API based. You could use one or the other to predicate an action. So what I mean by that is, let's say your EDR flags something on a server that says, hey, this is infected. You could use that to pump an action which would pull that host into a quarantine segment, and then you could use that to actually functionally remove any risk or expansion potential. You could do it the other way around, where as you move things around inside Illumio, if your EDR or NDR has some sort of API front end to manipulate what's going on with it, you could feed that back. But that's kind of the basics of the server world. The integration with Crowdstrike and on the endpoint side of the world is a little bit different, because the functional unit that we're protecting, a laptop versus a server workload, is just different, right? The profile is just different. So the way we do it from an endpoint perspective is we obviously have to install an agent, and that is a bit of an ask from an endpoint perspective. All of us know that a corporate laptop is just bloated with stuff, and the goal is I want as little on there as possible to do its job. So what we're doing is, if you want to bring segmentation to the endpoint space and you're already a Crowdstrike user, you can actually leverage the Crowdstrike agent to do all of our work. So you can use the software platform of Illumio to visualize, to map, and to enforce policy for your endpoints. But that enforcement and that work will all be done by the existing Crowdstrike agent. So the integration on the endpoint side is more focused around making the most of the solutions that you may already have in place. And I kind of like to think that that's the ethos of Illumio as a whole. If you think about our architecture, we don't necessarily ask you to sit in line to your traffic or ask you to put something completely different in the environment. In our product, we program the native stateful firewall on your OS, Windows filtering platform, IP tables, net filter. We even build integrations with, Cat 9K switches, Palo Alto firewall. So we offer a strong visualization and segmentation platform, but the idea isn't that, this is the end all be all. We know the world is diverse. We know that there is a lot of infrastructure at play. There's a lot of security solutions at play. Being able to operate in partnership with those is absolutely critical, because if you can't, then you're going to create, competing points of enforcement, or you're going to create competing, policies, and it's just not going to work well.
Okay. You mentioned the EDR, integrations there with CrowdStrike and how you can, find odd behavior and put it into a quarantine segment.
Yep.
Is that the predominant way you stop the spread of ransomware or malware in an environment?
Yeah.
Is there any other ways that Illumio can help if you don't have an integrated EDR solution?
Sure. So, as a kind of baseline, what we like to say is the goal of segmentation is to give you an environment that is, for lack of a better term, by default kind of quarantined. And I use those kind of terms a little loosely, but the meaning and the idea behind that is if you've created a zero trust or least privilege segmentation model, that means no matter what was to happen, if it was breached or not breached, the pathways out are as minimal as possible. So the blast radius by design is as small as possible. So that's the first level of preventing the spread or the propagation of something like ransomware, right? The second level of it, like you said, is the movement into something completely locked down. And that, that's generally, if you wanted to do that, there's a couple ways to do it. You can do it with in an automated fashion like that. Where you have something alerting you to it. It may not be an EDR, it may be, a SIM, it may be an NDR, maybe something that has said somewhere and raised its hand going, hey, there's a potential infection here. And then you can take that action to move it. That is I would call that a secondary kind of functionality and capability that you can use Illumio for, and that you can use segmentation to do. I would say the core of stopping ransomware spreading for segmentation is really creating a world in which by default and by design, the pathways around the world or around the environment are as minimal as possible. Only what's necessary to do its job. And that makes it so when something does get popped, you're not in a world where you have thousands of pathways out and you have to figure out what you can do to stop it.
Okay. Cool. So we have a few minutes left here. I'm a CIO or I'm a CISO, and I'm looking, for new solutions, and I'm looking at the Forrester Wave report, which y'all have had done recently. There's a link in the show notes to how you can get that report. What do the findings mean by being a leader, and why does that matter for somebody looking for a zero trust solution?
Sure. So Forrester started this wave a little while back, and it's really designed, it talks about what we talked about all at the beginning here, zero trust being a philosophy and a way of doing security. And so what they do is they take a lot of, you look at the spread of vendors that participated, and it was large. It was from, the likes of Illumio to Cisco to Palo Alto, all different companies doing zero trust. There may be some on that list, there may be not on that list. It's just really, there's a lot of people doing parts of zero trust or trying to achieve zero trust with their solutions. And what Forrester does is they look at them and they look at the approach they're taking to what they're trying to solve. So, with Illumio trying to do segmentation, using a zero trust approach to do segmentation, how well do we accomplish that goal, right? And that's the light you want to think about this in, because again, I don't want to get into a discussion where you say, oh, we looked at zero trust wave and Forrester said this is the leader, and that's all we need to buy for zero trust. That's really not what the goal of that report is. The goal is to say, zero trust as a philosophy should be driving how products are built, how solutions are put into place, how you design your architecture. And they evaluated these vendors against that criteria. How well do they achieve the goals of zero trust with what they're trying to accomplish? And so, you can check out that report. Illumio did come out as the leader in that report. And the real reason was because if you look at everything that we've done from the product space, whether it's, user access to the console and the portal, to policy creation for your workloads and your servers and your applications, the zero trust is that underpinning, that philosophy and that mindset to how we offer the solution, how we build the solution, and how you can use the solution. So definitely a good read. It's a good, good way to understand the philosophy of zero trust. I would definitely recommend it.
Cool. Awesome. Now I know we're coming up on time, but do you have any other things that you would like to point out for people that are thinking about implementing something like this that we didn't cover, or any just, I don't know, like points that, that would be good to know.
You guys did, you guys covered a lot of good things, and I think we had a great discussion on it. I mean, the last thing that I'll leave with is, whatever we talked about here, microsegmentation as a project is not something to take lightly. Everyone has looked at it. If you're thinking about doing it, there's a lot of approaches to it. You can take a lot of different routes, and some may be easier, some may be harder, some may be just what you think you want to do. But I would say that challenge the boundaries a little bit on how you approach the goal, because the first thing, even I think about this coming from a networking background or engineering background. When someone says segmentation or network segmentation or microsegmentation, the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is VLANs, zones, cutting up my network, access control rules. That's what we start thinking of, and that's what we start building off of. And that's what we start kind of creating our approach to it. We talked about this, but that's not necessarily the easiest way to get there. And it may not even be the most effective way to get there, because it starts creating this like massive, operational overhead. So, think it through and perhaps, sit back and let's say like, well, it's going to be super challenging to do this way, and I may want to take that route, but what is an alternative? Is there another way to do it? And that's really where the idea of thinking about it from a host perspective. Let's not worry about the network or the underpinnings of the connections. That's where it becomes really powerful, because when you start looking at it from the host, you can start abstracting away all of the complexities of the network and let the network do what it's good for, connecting things, do it at speed, get it right, and then use the host, use the kind of native controls that you already have in place there to define those segmentation boundaries, to define that kind of policy. So that's really all I would say. It's a little different, but it's the right approach. I would say it's the right approach.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, Neil, I think we've hit our half an hour or better here. If people were interested in finding out more about Illumio or implementation thereof, how would they go about reaching out to your organization?
Absolutely. So first step, obviously, digital age, check out our website. You can chat with somebody right there on the website if you need to. Definitely reach out. You can even, in that chat bot or contact us section, you'll get in touch with one of our reps, and, you'll get in touch really quickly. We can talk you through it. You got someone like myself, one of our SEs, they'll talk you through all the technical requirements, what it would look like specifically in your environment. Talk to us about any type of concern you have, zero trust, segmentation. We're happy to listen and see if we can offer a solution.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Neil Patel, for joining us on BreakSec this week. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, guys.